Good morning and welcome to AI in Australia. This is episode 3 and this is Tim Matthis. I'm joined with Sean Rolls. I'm dialing in from a very cold Canberra and Sean is in Melbourne. How are you, Sean?
It's been a big week back in Melbourne after a few days in Sydney for the Gartner Conference, hearing a lot of analysts talking on their predictions and debriefing on what's next with the AI, which we're about to dive into. I'm glad it's the weekend, that's for sure, to do a Gartner detox.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we jump into that, and I'm dying to hear all about your Gartner experience, I think I'll play the role of the executive who needs some advice based on everything that you learned at Gartner. But before that, I just wanted to connect the dots. Last week we'd spoken about Sam Altman's blog about the gentle singularity and the AI coming to take over the world. I did see that this week there was another interesting article, Sean. I don't know if you read it, about some Apple researchers speaking about the fact that these models, these deep reasoning models, are hitting some serious limits.
Yeah, I did read part of that. Basically looking at the accuracy, but not as detailed a view. But it's the first time I've seen Apple come into this space in terms of showing basically that, hey, not everything's perfect in the AI space, that most things so far have been validating or trying to say that, hey, here's the new shiny update and release when we're looking at the Geminis and the ChatGPT versions going up. But the more technical one in this sector, do you want to give us what's your takeaway in terms of for those people who didn't read it? Because it was really interesting to understand what their views were, because it's good to have two sides to the story.
Yeah, so there was a paper. I mean, I think everybody's trying to understand what the future is going to look like here, and it's so difficult to know. I mean, I think we should give everybody the grace to know that things are evolving at such an incredible pace, and also in sort of a fairly unpredictable way. So anybody might be right. I mean, I think that's the first thing. Apple wrote a paper. The paper was called "The Illusion of Thinking." And really what the researchers found in these, what are now called large reasoning models, is that under in certain instances, they encounter something called a complexity cliff, or an effort paradox, I think they spoke about. And that's really that when the reasoning tasks become really difficult, these LLMs or reasoning models, they start to perform really poorly. And they spoke about the Tower of Hanoi challenge, which is the one where you've got the little, the 3 pins and then the discs that go on them, and you have to sort of reorganize them. And the more that gets infinitely more complex, the more of the little loops that you put onto it. But what seems to happen is that the reasoning models give up despite having unused capacity. And this is something to do with the size of the token limits and the size of the context windows. I must say that there were a couple of rebuttals to this argument as well out in the media that said that they felt that the research hadn't been set up all that well, and that it wasn't really a failing of the reasoning models, but more that the agents or the reasoning models themselves were saying that they're going to stop reasoning because this task is taking up effectively too much memory or too many tokens. But I think the message is probably more that what we were saying last week, that the gentle singularity probably isn't going to arrive this year. Like if I were to bet, if I were to take a position on this, I think we're going to see more and more of these complicated breaks, slowdowns. We've got the fantasy of the incredible progress that's going to come. But the reality is we're talking about really complex systems here. And there are going to be many different areas and edge cases where they don't perform well. And even if it is a case like Apple have indicated that, or perhaps the people who are arguing the other side of the Apple case, even if these applications could perform these reasoning tasks but are choosing not to for some unknown reason, we still don't really fully understand why it is under certain circumstances they decide to preserve the resources and not perform. But the end point is that they're not performing. So I'm very much back to where we were, which is to say that there's plenty of time here for us to adapt to the change. We really need to know what's going on and engage with the stuff. And let's not just sit back and think that the gentle singularity is going to come and take over all of these tasks, and AKA we can be really, really lazy and do nothing. I'm hogging the mic here, Sean. I did see another article that came out from some MIT researchers that said that people are getting really lazy. They did some functional MRIs or something in people's brains while they were on ChatGPT and saw that the number of neurons firing is like going down. I think we need to keep the brains moving, keep thinking, and keep applying ourselves to a future here where we're still relevant.
Yeah, it's a really good point to talk about, like people being lazy, and these days where people, when there's a question that we're seeing, talk about the culture when somebody goes, "Oh, how do I do this?" Because I'll just ask ChatGPT. which normally you go, oh, let me look into it, or let's use some problem solving. And we've seen, if you think back to the last big change where, people's attention span because of the iPhone and now also social media with swiping things, that there's been a huge drop off in professions that require the professions that require like deep thinking and focus, that these are harder to fill because of people's adaptation has been due to short-term focus and are distracted more easily because of the nature of we're all glued to our phones and social media. So if you then take that next leap of we all like just, hey, let's throw basically complex tasks, give it to AI or LLM, that's what's the impact of people who are actually going to have real problem solving across organizations.
Yeah.
Like this laziness, but also too that and I talked about this at Gartner, and I want to go that in a second, but just think about it on your article you just mentioned there, as well as just, I think all of us need to think about it, that the generation coming up now who are sort of more native towards the AI and see AI as a tool, that they have been trained into some of the traditional problem solving or research and sort of more deep work, as we refer to it. And there's a great book called Deep Work that where you get a lot more human context analysis. And if that skill is going to be missing in the generation coming up, who basically throw it to an agent and it spits back, and then they take that, then do we really understand what's been given to us if the people who haven't been trained on deep analysis? I don't know what's your thought on that one, Tim, given it, it's going to be a massive shift in people of old school versus new school with AI thinking and tools around.
Yeah. So, I mean, this article that I've just referenced and we're talking about now from MIT is called Your Brain on ChatGPT, the accumulation of cognitive debt when using an AI assistant for essay writing. And I won't go into too much of the detail, other than to say that what they found is that people who are using these assistants are actively disengaging their brains. And I think some of the things they looked at was recall. So if you're using like a chat assistant to write an essay as an example, and you write a paragraph and then you get it to polish it, they asked participants at the end of the exercise of producing their own work with these assistants, what they'd written about, and their recall of what the task they had just performed had been was like vastly inferior to somebody who wasn't using those tools. And it kind of reminds me almost of like using Google Maps and learning a new town. When you turn on Google Maps and you listen to the step-by-step prompting and you drive somewhere, if you try to do it again without that, you can't even remember where you went. You've got no idea. Whereas if you not using it, an old school map, and you're looking at road signs and kind of embedding those cues into your brain, your ability to recall and set down new patterns is far greater. So I think there's real danger here, and I think that I think we can just hand over to these AI tools, and I think many people will, and they'll become very lazy, and I think they'll suffer for it. But I think that the counterfactual is actually, what does it look like if you learn how to use these tools well and continue to think of yourself in symbiosis with these tools, not as a just kind of subordinating out all of your cognitive skills to them, but you have to do the hard work. So, I mean, so the most native, I suppose, an obvious example here is use the stuff, but still engage deeply. Take the discipline, that it requires to understand what you're doing. Don't be lazy. Understand what it means to write a good prompt. Still make sure that the bulk of the work is your thoughts and your reasoning. And you don't want to end up like you described, Sean. You don't want to end up one of those people who in the future has no critical thinking ability at all, can't even discern what's LLM generated from what's kind of native human. So I think we're at a moment in time where the ability to be lazy is going to be bigger than ever, but the advantage for the people who don't is obviously also going to be really significant, because so many people are just going to fall into the trope of like just using the stuff to do all the hard intellectual work for themselves. But Sean, over to you. Tell us about what happened at Gartner this week. So those are the real hardcore thinkers, the people who are, sort of prognosticating about the future. And what are the big trends? What did you see?
I said, if I can, let me start from in terms of overall impressions. I go to Gartner every year, and last year was the first year where the AI ready sort of focus came about. And this year was a takeoff. I was probably overall, I wasn't overwhelmed as I was last year. A lot of this, the content from last year was just sort of extended with probably less fresh content that would normally come from Gartner, and then them sort of reinforcing a lot of the concepts that was introduced last year. Particularly like, the importance of a data fabric to AI-ready data, but more unpacking what AI-ready data actually is, and then sort of them validating a lot of the research regarding how many organizations are close to AI-ready and what they invest and where the investments are and the type of skills. So So overall, nothing new, but there was I spoke to a lot of organizations there, especially leaders and sort of architects who who are armed to task these. And I said, what's your impressions? Are you on the right track? Is this new to you? And they're going like, well, geez, there's a lot. There's a lot to do. There's a big shift that we need to move in this direction, and also a lot of teams during the breaks, in deep discussions about how do we move towards this direction. So yeah, I think for people who saw last year.
Sorry, what's the mood of the attendees? Are you finding that the mood is like excited, or are people feeling there's a lot of work to be done, or like is it? Sometimes what happens when there's so much hype.
You can sum it by very clearly overwhelmed. Yeah, and it's a great question because I actually asked a lot of that. Some of the people are like, "Oh, what's your feeling about this?" They go like overwhelmed. They say like, "There's just so much. There's so much to do here," and they said so much of it is so new to what we're not doing today. So, and that applies to everybody. Like every organization is going for a reset in terms of, and this is where there's a great session about like the must-have roles in data analytics and AI, and you look at all these new roles that. Prompt engineering, data product manager, you got your, large language model ontologist. Most of these roles don't exist in the majority of organizations. The ones who've been on this journey for a while, we're talking a very, very small percentage of organizations, but most of them, they're overwhelmed and they're also confused about, the roadmap about where do we start?
Yeah.
And where to find these people. Because what Gartner talked about in some of the sessions when they have phases, they say like, here's what you need to do, but in the reality, the profiles of these people are very difficult to find in the market.
Really difficult to find and probably not fully known.
It's more overwhelmed than people like the leaders going.
Yeah. And if I think about all those things you described.
But also too, like
yeah. So I think if you think about
exactly.
There's a little bit of a delay here. If you think about what those roles might mean, so if you have somebody says that I need to have like a large language model prompt engineer, what is that? Is that a person who was a copywriter? Is it a person who knows how to write good English? Or is it a person who knows how to write good code? Or is it just a person who's like a really good communicator? So it's almost hard to know. People, I'm seeing a lot of job, we obviously follow the space a lot, and you see a lot of job ads going up. And there's almost like an impulse just to say that everybody needs to know Python and be a machine learning engineer. But I think that a lot of the skills that are going to come into the space, we're still trying to work out what they really are and what type of person, what type of background is right to occupy these positions. So if I think about myself sitting as an executive trying to build an AI first business, I might not even know how to answer who am I hear the names, an LLM engineer and a prompt this and a whatever else, but I might not know how to solve for that. So I can imagine there's quite a lot of overwhelm in the market at the moment.
Definitely. And but I suppose, yeah, and then if you take that, if you're an executive, and this is where like you're the executive in the shoes right now, and I'm coming back from Gartner giving you a debrief of like, okay, what does that mean to two things? How do we, transition to the next phase in the organization to be, ready, and what does that mean for us as what we do today versus those who want to be like an AI first? What's common to both of those is that you actually need to redefine those roles in terms of not be too much attached to the actual label of the LLM analyst or the prompt engineer, but think about the core skills of how you need to think. In some of the sessions, and this goes back to also, think about those who can deal with the complexity, those who have strong, have skills in around curiosity and innovation. These are the ones that are actually going to enable you to be able to learn how to be a LLM or work in natural language if you unpack a lot of the sessions across Gartner, what's common to everything that you're dealing with complexity. Like let's not undersell that the AI era we're coming up to is complex. Data, metadata management, we have large language models, we have prompts. There's a lot of things going on. And for those who succeed, those who can unpack and problem solve, and those who can think holistically and think of these layers coming together, and then join these people who are specialists in terms of prompts and ontology and LLMs, that, back to our last podcast, creates business value. These are the skills that people in your team that need to have as baseline. And then from those, then you can then, like when you're doing a football team, yes, those skill sets, your profile is suited towards working in the LLM and prompts, and you're great working as a business analyst to get a lot of the data requirements into these areas. So that's where looking at that unpacking in terms of to make practical insights what does it mean for the executive today? Is that looking at your staff and there's the new people that you're recruiting, in that how they think, looking at the type of skills, can they work with complexity and problem solving, and then redefine those core roles that Gartner calls out in terms of the AI Pacific, in terms of which people can suit each of those accordingly in terms of getting execution and business value for you as an organization.
I mean, it's very complicated. I think you're right. It is complex, and I think there's a big disservice being done in the public narrative at the moment where, I'm back on LinkedIn for the first time in a long time. It's so exciting to be building again. But you see posts that say things like, I built an AI agent and it made me $315,000 last night while I slept by fully automating product design, execution, da da da. And you just look at this stuff and you just think, my goodness, like, is that even real? And for the most part, that isn't real. I mean, I think that's the reality. I think that there's so much, like we spoke about it last week as well, hyperbole out there. But the reality is you can't simplify the complexity of big systems. And big systems are, at one level, the interactions of people working in an organization. And we talk to organizations that have got hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people working together as a system in the service of their customers. That complexity doesn't go away with technology, certainly not the technology we have right now. And I almost see three big parts to this. Like, as an organization, first of all, you need to be able to have let's call it like the bricks and mortar, the infrastructure to be able to act. And that's the data ready stuff. And I think we will talk about that more. I'd love to hear from you, Sean, like in a moment, like what is this AI data readiness that everyone's talking about? But we know that needs to be done, right? Like, you need to be able to, when it comes time to build in something that's really relevant in your organization, you need to have had the foundations built. So that's like almost the first of three pillars. The second pillar is that you need to have a clear vision of what it is that your business needs to do better for your customers. And this hasn't changed. It's like, where is your ear to the railway track in terms of what are your customers saying? What keeps you, sort of having a competitive advantage? And some of it is just iteration on your existing offerings, getting rid of customer pain points. Some of it's creating new offerings that could be category changing or not. And then the third part, which sits right in the middle of those two. So you've got the customer on this one side, and then you've got like kind of, have I got the bricks and mortar, in my organization ready to act? It's how are you able to harness your organization to act on those opportunities? That's the org change part. It's like, how do I actually push go? Have I got an operational model inside that's hub and spoke, which is like generally advisory? So I've got these centers of excellence, but I actually can't get my people to act, even though I've got the customer demand on the one side and I've got the infrastructure ready on the other. I can't push go because I can't get people to overcome the inertia they have or the metrics that are, they're driven by other KPIs. So, they are just that in three very high levels. There's a great deal of complexity on all three of those buckets, which organizations are going to need to overcome. They're going to need to find ways through.
Definitely. And as you raised, it goes back to, what's constant with all these changes we've seen it with technology, like going from lakes to clouds and then to graph and then now to AI ready, is that's that Venn diagram between, people, technology and processes. And this really emphasized, so while those circles are common across all those three sort of across those evolutions, the complexity of those three overlapping is becoming more and more complex, as you mentioned. And that's where, like these Gartner conferences, they make the complex less complex, but doesn't take away the complexity, and it provides the guidance that okay, this is what I need to do for my technology, this is what I need to do for my data, and these are the new roles that I have. But like everything else, for those, if you take a simple analogy, like going to IKEA, when you get your instructions and okay, I got my materials, I've seen in the display how things need to look like, how to put it together comes down to your culture and your leaders and the people you actually have to understand how do these three circles come together. And that's the essence of when we, in my view, having worked in this space for quite some time, especially in the AI ready space, is that those organizations culturally who can have the leaders and actually pick the right people and train the people in this new way to actually overlap those three areas of the technology, the data, and the culture that work together in this AI ready space. They're the ones who are going to succeed and drive the biggest value and to, as you mentioned, Tim, create the customer value versus those who still work in silos and buy the sexy new tools and technology and think this is, let's use agents for all these things and we can just automate a lot of this to reduce their headcount. They're the ones who are not going to succeed. That's my.
And you really need all three to come together here. Like, probably
Absolutely.
more so than ever because, I mean, I'm sure you and I have both sat on many big tech implementations, whatever they are, enterprise replatformings, pick your moment, pick whatever it was that was driving it. And, if you're strategically off the mark and you're not landing in a place, organizational change takes time, particularly big tech. So if you're not going to land in a place that's going to meet your customer in the future, you're going to end up, you need sufficiencies in all three of those domains we spoke about, the infrastructure, the organizational readiness, and then the fact that you're going to land somewhere in the future that meets customer demand. Because the danger to go and we've spoken about this before, but the danger to build in the moment because you can build cool stuff is like worse than ever before. But
Yes.
whether or not that stuff is going to be relevant, and also there's a huge risk this time around of like kind of a sea of sameness. There's going to be everybody's got access to all of this tech this time around in terms of rapid
Yeah,
prototyping
exactly.
and building out things. So if you're going to go and spend lots of money as an organization, you need to be very, very sure it's going to deliver value to customers. And I think again, that's going to be like a really guiding pillar. You need to either be optimizing your internal processes so that you spend less to deliver value to your customers, which is obviously like one of the drivers of your EBITDA as an organization, or the other is you just have to be giving much more value to your customers. And if you're
Yeah.
not doing one of those two things, and there's always the third one, which unfortunately is the one I hate the most, but it's regulation and requirement and compliance. You have to meet those as well.
Yeah.
The ability to get lost is going to be quite profound this time around. And I think that I feel, having sat in the executive seat before, I feel this one's harder to get your head around. In the past, when we were talking digital transformation and you could see that I had a manual form that needed to be filled out with a pen and paper, and somebody showed me a digital asset that replaced that and automated it, that was obvious. Like, of course, that made a lot of sense. But there's just so much stuff now. I can see that executives are going to be feeling like more at sea than ever before. So, I mean, Gartner are generally really good at helping, like, at least shine a directional light on where the big spend is and what the trends are. Like, what came out there? Like, where's the money flowing? Because the money flowing generally indicates where the market's mind is. Is it on executive education? Is it on tech? What's going on? What came out there?
So one of the I'll quote directly off one of the slides that actually had talk about facts here. So there was a presentation which looked at where the investments are going, and there's one where it has the investment in AI ready data is the number one priority of executives. So they looked at like what you described there, Tim, about the previous investments. So they looked at the scale of Apple in terms of investments in data quality and governance, investments in building architectures for like data management and data products, investments towards data integration and preparation. So all those things ranked secondary. What was on the very top was the investments in AI-ready data initiatives. That was a clear leader of where the executives are prioritizing investments, which last year, things around data management and sort of platforms and data products, they were up near the top. But now that's this whole bundle of AI-ready investments at the very top. What they actually mean, what was common across most of the presentations was the emphasis of investing in a data fabric. So when people ask, and I spoke to one of the analysts one-to-one there about like, how do you explain to an executive what does AI ready really mean? And it's basically unpack it in terms of, at the highest level is building a modularized organization, which is, hence like LLMs and your knowledge graphs and then your data management capabilities. And across all that, the important thing that you need to go across all your people is you need to manage metadata. That if you look at the amount of times the word metadata was mentioned, I reckon every session an analyst talked about metadata. And that used to be like a sort of foreign word about 5 years ago. People are like, oh, that's what tech do. But no, if you work in the AI ready space, either from business or from technology, especially if you're managing context, which is what AI is, you need to have a common language regarding how you manage your metadata. And then work in layers in terms of this data fabric. There's different interpretations of what a data fabric is. Gartner gave theirs. But for an executive, you just need to think about there needs to be layers of how do I get towards AI ready for, as you mentioned, Tim, customer value, and work in a way that those layers integrate together so you don't get hallucinations in your AI, you don't get crap in, crap out, and also too, you don't have regulation or regulators down your throat by having the wrong type of data being used for AI that you shouldn't be doing, like with PII or sensitive data.
I mean, I suppose it's good if you think about those three buckets that are described, like if we say in 50% of people or whatever, the number one priority is AI ready data. At least organizations are recognizing the fact that even if there's an organizational willingness to change or there's customer expectations that are changing. You have to get your house in order and you have to spend there. I mean, I wonder how this plays out. Are there tricks to acceleration? Because what you describe in like a metadata layer, let me have a go at making that like accessible to like our audience from a layperson's perspective. You have all your data structures, which would be maybe in their most basic transactions. So think about phoning a bank and updating my details, something like that to the bank. That would then write an entry into a structured database, so query or like a SQL type of database, Oracle, something like that, where you've got relationships and you've got primary keys and you've got a record that says Tim, identity, no primary key one is linked to a field called first name and another field called email address and whatever else. And he's now there's been a transaction with a timestamp on it that says we've updated this value from X to Y. That's like the native system. Then on top of that, people have built all sorts of different warehouses, ways of like integrate. Like if I want to go and report on that and see how many people are there called Tim, or how many people are there, how many address changes were there this month, I have to have a layer of abstraction outside of my transactional system, a warehouse of sorts, where I can go and run some like information. Like I can go and run some MI, management information. But what we're talking about now is another layer that looks, there might be 10 or 15 different isolated, almost like independent systems in any given, like just take a bank as an example. There might be one for home loans, there might be one for credit cards, there might be one for primary customer record, all that sort of stuff. None of those were designed, they may have been designed at different times by different teams. They don't have like a common, they're not firstly in the same database, often is the case. And secondly, there's no way to like bridge the meaning between them all. So like other than trying to find like some clever way of building composite like key, which was very much in vogue many years ago, like trying to build like common identification keys to have a single view of the customer. Now what this AI ready data and the semantic layers is all about saying what are these things describing? Like, what are the common names for these things that I'm trying to describe? They may have different actual names inside all of those different transactional systems or even those warehouses. But how do I abstract them up in a way that when I try to engage with all of it that means the same Tim, what are all the primary cards? Where are all the different Tims or first names? Like, Tim is a first name. Like, how do I map that and how do I store that? And that's that layer, that semantic layer of meaning, which I think is often done in these knowledge graphs where you're an absolute expert, Sean, that customers have to get right before they can then go and talk about things like data consumers on the other side. People in the organization are going to go and consume data across. Is that I don't know if like I don't have a hash job at that, but describe for our audience in layperson's terms what this AI ready data is. Take it from where I've led it and add to it.
So yeah, so you're spot on in terms of like if you think if like there was one slide that basically we had to be if like just make it really simple to back to our executive takeaway is that there's like three phases to get to AI ready. The first phase is building that foundation. So what you described there, Tim, is like getting your data to be what technical word virtualized or basically breaking down the silos. We've all most organizations, whether it be a bank or a telco or a retail company, they all have silos of customer data, product data. They're bringing those together and instead of working with foreign keys and primary keys or relational databases, AI Ready works in knowledge graphs, graph databases and ontologies and semantic layers. And these are foreign to most organizations other than the Googles, the Amazons, the Netflixes and the Teslas who are natively in the space. So to get to, and there's the slide that Gartner used goes, there's a bridge between two islands, the data and then the AI. So that bridge is basically what you need to build. Every organization, big or small, needs to build that bridge from the data bridge to the AI bridge. And that bridge needs to go in phases. To take off where you've gone, Tim, is that after you get your data in good shape and you get having this common meaning and context for the semantic layer, then it's about like, okay, back to customer value, what do these things mean as relationships? So it's almost like Google Maps when you go like, okay, what's the best shop to buy lunch? Now that's all context driven. What my favorite place for lunch may be different to yours, Tim. So that's where hence that who is asking the question, hence like your AI prompts, and what are the most common answers that the customers are going to choose for that persona, and then for other persona that they mean this. So these are the relationships between this data will get the most successful answer, so the customer is happy or satisfied. That's where hence we're moving away from knowledge management to now. Moving away from data management. The next phase is knowledge management, so that knowledge is about what are customers. What do we know about the customers, and what are the questions that they most likely want to know and need to know? And then how do we join that data together to retrieve that data back to them as knowledge so that they do things faster, more automated, or more context enriched? So AI has a huge emphasis on context, and that context needs to be done by an organization to map those relationships, which is the knowledge graph. To get really simple, this is how data is related in a way that solves business problems. And that is the next phase of basically moving towards AI ready. And then the more complicated step is how do you get your large language models and your RAGs, the retrieval, to basically come together and to work as one complete ecosystem between your data, your technology, and your own way of working with AI in your own organization, the culture.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Sean, what did Gartner say about executive education and upskilling? Because I mean that must be an area where people are thinking and wondering, and how are businesses tackling that? I mean, from an org change perspective, and making sure executives know what they're doing and drive the right actions down to managers.
There's really great question, particularly when a lot of the data analytics conferences in the past before AI Ready was more geared towards the CIO or the CDO. But since the executives have on the surveys and research that AI executives have AI Ready as the top initiative, there's a lot of there's some really key presentations that Gartner really talked to the AI executive in terms of the AI executives need to actually be trained in terms of understanding what are the different at a high level components of what AI is, as well as recognizing that there needs to be a transition towards the profiles of people working in the so-called AI ready space, which is going to require a substantial investment in profiles, training the people who haven't done this before, as well as creating new teams that are working in extremely different ways than they have done them before. So that leadership of, first of all, training the executives in terms of the language, what these things mean in terms of the data fabrics, the knowledge graphs, the technology, is they need to be educated on these, because this is where the investments need to be made, rather than delegate it down below and say, I'll sit back there and you guys deliver. But also too, that they need to understand, because this is complicated and you can't basically fake it till you make it, that organizations need to provide this executive education in the space of this AI ready that is not technical like down below, but at a higher level, so they can provide that leadership and to transition to the teams that's going to help them succeed, rather than lead it to the people below them who's just going to do a tech solution or try to work in silos.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, Sean, I think this has been a good overview of kind of the week that was in Gartner. We have made a commitment to our listeners that we were going to provide them with some cool tools and tips and things beyond this. So please pop us a post or a comment if there's something specific you want to see. But what we will do is Sean and I are building out a resources page on our website. I think conceptually it's one thing to understand when we start talking about ontologies and things like that, but it's quite there's the word ontology in English, and then there's the word ontology in data. They mean slightly different things, although mostly the same thing. It's all about how things connect and what they mean. One thing I would like to put up there, which we'll commit you to do, is why do data ontologies matter when you've got things like vector embeddings? For those of you that played around with things like RAG, Sean spoke about RAG. That is embedding meaning to some extent anyway. You're looking at vector relationships. So how is that different from data ontologies in graph? And they are slightly different, and they play a very important role. In fact, things like knowledge graphs can constrain to some extent the ways in which a sort of a more vanilla RAG, like a Pinecone embedding, might go wrong. So the two work hand in glove together, particularly when it comes to creating workflows in an organization where you require more predictable results. And because even with RAG, sometimes, these applications are unable to prioritize one bit of embedded data over another. And that semantic layer, those ontologies can really help to guide it. So I think that's very important. But Sean, it's been so nice to hear from you how Gartner went, and any final parting words of wisdom before we wrap it up on this cold Friday.
For those who want the cheat sheet of Gartner, I'll spend my weekend unpacking this with you and I, Tim, can come up with some cheat sheet resources that we can give away as resources. So for those who went to the conference and then are basically going, where do I start reading these pages of research, which there's a lot of it, versus those who couldn't make it. But will help both of you, both your groups, with some bite-sized cheat sheets to basically a one-page overview of some of the key topics and trends to help you accelerate and to be AI ready, from the AI executive down to some of those individual key players. So they're my takeaways for the weekend in terms of homework for our listeners to get some of these bite-sized pieces out to them.
That sounds wonderful. And then just a commitment from Sean and I. If you have any questions, no matter how silly you might think they be, maybe the framing here is this real? If you've seen something and you're like, oh, that sounds like a little bit of, is that hyperbole? Is that a real thing? Pop it to us. We'll give you a critical opinion on whether or not it's just marketing or whether it's real. And if it's something really interesting, maybe what we'll start to do is show you how you can build some of those things. We really want to get to a stage in this pod where we build some tools, use 35 minutes to show you how stuff is done, but we need some guidance from you as well. So let us know if there are things that you, A, want to validate whether they're real, or B, would like us to help you tackle. But wonderful to have you on the pod, and spread the word, and have a wonderful warm weekend from AI in Australia.
Exactly. Enjoy the your AI playground, everybody, on the weekends. Be safe with your rags and knowledge crafts, and we'll see you next week.
Don't do anything naughty with your rags. Bye.
Exactly. Keep it clean.